My father spent 31 years in the Army before I ever put on a uniform myself. He had 2 rows of ribbons on his dress blues and exactly one rule in our house: you do not embarrass this family. The day I enlisted, I broke that rule in under 9 words. He was standing in the kitchen doorway when I told him. I remember the coffee mug in his hand didn't even shake. He just looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "You've made yourself a disgrace to this family." I was 18 years old. I picked up my duffel bag from the hallway floor, and I left for basic training that same afternoon. 15 years later, the Army sent my family a formal invitation to a medal ceremony. My father RSVP'd yes. He drove 4 hours to be there. He stood exactly 3 feet away from me on that stage. And when the moment came for him to step forward and pin it on my chest, the way fathers do for their soldiers, he didn't move. So I reached up, and I pinned it on myself. Welcome back to Kayla's Dark Truth, where the quiet ones finally get their moment. If you've ever had to build a life your own family refused to be proud of, stay with me. Drop a comment when you get to the ceremony scene. I want to know if you saw it coming. And hit subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from. My name is Elena Whitfield. I'm 33 years old, and for most of my life, I was raised to believe that being a Whitfield meant following a very specific script. My father, Colonel Richard Whitfield, retired after 31 years of service, infantry, then logistics command, finishing his career training officers at Fort Benning. He was not a man who yelled. He didn't need to. He had a way of delivering disappointment so precisely that it landed harder than any shout ever could. My mother, Diane, taught high school English for 26 years. My older brother, Marcus, went to West Point the year I turned 14. In our house, that wasn't just an achievement. It was the blueprint. Marcus was the officer. I was supposed to be the one who went to a good university, got a business degree, married someone respectable, and gave my parents grandchildren to brag about at church. Nobody ever asked me what I actually wanted. To be fair, for most of my childhood, I didn't fully know either. What I did know was that I loved watching my father's old training films more than I loved anything else in that house. I knew the difference between a fire team and a squad before I could drive. I used to sit on the porch with him while he cleaned his old service pistol, not because I was allowed to touch it, but because I liked hearing him talk about the men he'd served with, the ones he still called brothers 30 years later. I think, somewhere in there, I fell in love with something he never meant to hand me. By the time I was a junior in high school, I'd already decided. Not officer track. Not ROTC and a 4-year commission like Marcus. I wanted to enlist. I wanted to start at the bottom, the way the soldiers my father always spoke most respectfully of had started, the ones who came up through the ranks instead of walking in with a college degree and gold bars. I told my mother first. She cried, but not in anger. She cried because she already knew how my father would take it. I told my father on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks after I turned 18. I'd already been to the recruiter. I'd already signed. I told myself I was being honest with him. Looking back, I think some part of me had simply stopped waiting for his permission. He set his coffee mug down slowly on the counter. He looked at me the way he used to look at soldiers who'd failed an inspection. "Enlisted," he said. Not a question. A verdict. "Yes, sir. You had every opportunity to go to West Point like your brother. Every opportunity to lead. And you're telling me you're going to go scrub latrines and take orders from 19-year-olds with more stripes than sense. I want to earn it from the ground up. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said the sentence I would carry with me for the next 15 years. You've made yourself a disgrace to this family. I didn't cry in front of him. I want that on the record. I picked my duffel bag up off the hallway floor. I'd packed it 3 days earlier, some part of me already knowing how this conversation would end, and I left for basic training that same afternoon. My mother drove me to the bus station. My father did not come outside. For the first 2 years, my mother called every Sunday. My father never got on the phone. Sometimes I could hear the television in the background, sometimes I could hear him in another room, close enough that I knew he could hear my voice, too. He never once asked to speak to me. I graduated basic training in the top 10% of my class. I sent a photo home. My mother told me later that my father looked at it for a long time and then set it down without comment. I made corporal in 18 months. Sergeant at 3 years. I called home the night I got my first set of stripes that actually meant something, buck sergeant, small unit leadership, the rank where the Army starts trusting you with people's lives, not just your own. My mother answered. Is Dad around? He's in the garage, honey. Can you tell him? There was a pause. Then she said, I will. I don't know if she ever did. I never got a call back. My brother Marcus, meanwhile, was climbing exactly the ladder our father had built for him. Commissioned as a second lieutenant, then first lieutenant, captain by the time I made staff sergeant. Every promotion of his came with a phone call, a card, sometimes even a small family dinner where my father would raise a glass and talk about legacy. I wasn't invited to those dinners. Not because anyone said I couldn't come. Because nobody ever mentioned they were happening until after the fact. I deployed for the first time in 2016. Iraq, logistics support, 9 months. I wrote my parents' letters, actual paper letters, because there's something about deployment that makes you want to do things the old way. My mother wrote back every time. My father's handwriting never once appeared on an envelope addressed to me. I deployed a second time in 2019, and a third time in 2021. By then I'd made staff sergeant, then sergeant first class. I was leading soldiers of my own, 22 of them at one point, responsible for their training, their readiness, sometimes their lives. I want to be clear that I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you this because somewhere along the way, I stopped needing my father to acknowledge it. Or at least, I told myself I had. In the spring of 2023, during my third deployment, my unit was providing logistics support near a forward operating base when we came under indirect fire during a resupply run. I'm not going to walk you through the operational details, some of it I still can't discuss, and honestly, some of it I don't like revisiting in detail even now. What I can tell you is that 3 of my soldiers were wounded, our lead vehicle was disabled, and for about 40 minutes, I was the senior non-commissioned officer responsible for getting 11 people out of a situation that was actively trying to kill us. We got everyone out. All 11. 2 of my soldiers needed surgery when we got them back to base. Both of them are alive today, and both of them still send me a message every year on the anniversary of that day. 6 months later, my command notified me that I was being awarded the Meritorious Service Medal for actions during that deployment. It's not the highest award the Army gives out, but it's not a participation ribbon either. It's the kind of medal that gets pinned on you in a formal ceremony, in front of your command, with your family invited to stand beside you. I hadn't planned on inviting my father. I invited my mother. I invited my brother, mostly out of courtesy, since by then he'd made major and we were at least cordial with each other. I did not put my father's name on the invitation list. My mother put it there herself. I found out 2 weeks before the ceremony. My mother called me, and for once, she didn't sound apologetic. She sounded almost proud of herself. I told your father about the ceremony. Mom, I didn't put him on the list. I know. I put him on it anyway. She paused. Elena, he's been different since Marcus told him what happened out there. He's been asking questions. Real questions. I didn't believe it. 15 years is a long time to build a wall, and I wasn't in a hurry to knock mine down over a phone call. He's not coming, Mom. He already bought the plane ticket. I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. 15 years of Sundays where he never got on the phone. 15 years of promotions that never earned a call back. And now, apparently, a medal was what finally bought his attention. I want to be honest with you about something. Part of me was angry about that. It felt cheap somehow, like the only thing that could move him was a piece of metal and a formal ceremony, when everything before it, the deployments, the leadership, the soldiers I brought home, hadn't been enough. But another part of me, that part one didn't like admitting existed, was 18 years old again, standing in that kitchen doorway, still waiting for him to say something other than disgrace. The ceremony was held on a Thursday morning in October, on the parade field at my post. My command formed up in their dress uniforms. There were maybe 200 people in the audience, soldiers, families, a few local reporters covering the story because of how the rescue had gone. My mother sat in the front row. Marcus sat beside her in his own dress uniform, having flown in the night before. And beside him, in a gray suit instead of the uniform he'd worn for 31 years, sat my father. I saw him when I marched out. He looked older than I remembered, not weaker, just older, the way people do when time finally catches up to the parts of them that used to seem permanent. He was watching me the entire time. I couldn't read his face. The ceremony followed the usual order. My commanding officer read the citation aloud, the resupply run, the ambush, the 11 soldiers, all of it laid out in formal army language that somehow made the worst 40 minutes of my life sound almost clean. Then came the part of the ceremony where a family member is invited forward to pin the medal onto the recipient's uniform. It's tradition. It's meant to be a moment where your service and your family come together in front of everyone who matters. My commanding officer looked toward the front row. Colonel Whitfield, would you do the honors? I watched my father stand up. For one long second, I actually believed it was going to happen. I watched him take one step forward, out from the row of chairs, onto the edge of the parade field. My chest actually tightened with something that felt dangerously close to hope. And then he stopped. He stood there, maybe 10 feet away from me, in front of 200 people, and he did not move any closer. I don't know exactly what was happening in his head in that moment. I've thought about it more times than I can count since. Maybe it was pride catching in his throat. Maybe it was 15 years of a story he'd told himself about who I was, refusing to update itself in real time. Maybe he simply didn't know how to close that kind of distance in front of an audience. Whatever it was, the silence stretched long enough that people started to notice. My commanding officer, to his credit, didn't rush it. He just waited, the small velvet box with the medal still open in his hands. My father did not step forward again. So I reached out, took the medal from the box myself, and pinned it onto my own uniform. I didn't say anything dramatic. I didn't look at him with anger, even though some part of me expected I would. I just did what needed to be done, the way I'd been trained to do for 15 years when the person who was supposed to show up didn't. My commanding officer shook my hand. The audience applauded. And my father sat back down in his chair, 3 feet closer to me than he'd been all morning, and somehow further away than he'd ever been. He found me almost an hour later, near the parking lot, after most of the crowd had cleared out. My mother and Marcus were giving us space, standing near the car, pretending very hard to be interested in something on Marcus's phone. Elena. I turned around. He looked smaller out there in the open lot than he had on the parade field. Or maybe I'd just gotten used to seeing him from a distance. You didn't have to walk out there, I said. Nobody would have thought less of you if you'd just stayed in your seat. He flinched at that, just slightly. I wanted to. Then why didn't you? He was quiet for a long moment, looking somewhere past my shoulder. I kept thinking about the last thing I said to you before you left for basic training. You told me I was a disgrace. I know what I said. His voice was rougher than I remembered. I've had 15 years to think about it, Elena. I told myself for a long time that I said it because I wanted better for you. College. Officer rank. A path I understood. He shook his head slowly. The truth is simpler than that, and uglier. You didn't choose the path I built for you, and I didn't know how to be proud of a path I didn't build. I didn't say anything. I let him keep going, because for 15 years, I'd wanted exactly this, and now that it was happening, I wasn't going to interrupt it. When I stood up out there, he said, I meant to walk over and pin that medal on you. I had it planned in my head the whole flight in. And then I got halfway there, and all I could think about was that I don't have the right. I gave up that right in your kitchen 15 years ago. He looked at me directly for the first time. I couldn't pin your medal on you, Elena, because I never once made you believe I was proud of you before you earned it. It felt like I'd be taking credit for something I refused to have any part of. I stood there for a while, letting that settle. It wasn't the apology I'd imagined 100 different times over 15 years. It was smaller than that, and somehow more honest. I'm proud of you, he said finally. I should have found a way to say that a long time before today. I know, I said. But I stopped needing you to say it, Dad. Somewhere in the last 15 years, I stopped waiting. He nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what that cost me, and exactly what it cost him. Can I still be proud of you anyway? He asked. Even if you don't need it anymore? I thought about that question longer than any other he'd asked me that day. Yeah, I said finally. You can. We didn't hug in that parking lot. That's not who my father is, and honestly, it's not entirely who I am anymore either. But he shook my hand, the same handshake he used to give the young officers he trained at Benning, firm, deliberate, like he was finally choosing to see me as someone who'd earned it. Over the next year, things didn't transform overnight. My father is not a man who changes quickly, and I'm not a woman who forgives quickly either. But he started calling on Sundays himself, instead of letting my mother carry the conversation. He asked real questions about my unit, my soldiers, the things I could actually talk about. 6 months after the ceremony, he flew out again, this time for my promotion board results. When I made Master Sergeant, he was the first person I called. He picked up on the first ring. I still have that medal. It sits in a small case on my dresser, and every time I look at it, I don't think about the ambush, or the 40 minutes, or even the ceremony itself. I think about the 10 feet of parade field my father couldn't quite cross, and the fact that I didn't need him to. I used to think being a disgrace meant failing to become what your family wanted. I don't think that anymore. I think the real disgrace would have been standing in that kitchen doorway at 18 years old and choosing his version of my life over my own, just to keep the peace. If somebody in your life is waiting for you to become someone else before they'll be proud of you, I want you to hear this clearly: you're allowed to pin your own medal on. You're allowed to become the version of yourself nobody in your family planned for. And someday, the people who called it a disgrace might just show up to watch you become exactly who you were always meant to be, even if they can't quite close that last 10 feet themselves. That's my story. If you've ever had to build your life without the applause you were waiting for, tell me about it in the comments. And if this one meant something to you, share it with somebody who needs to hear it today. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.